So what questions should a contracting officer be asking of their customers before doing an acquisition? Stick around and we're going to talk about just that tonight. But first, good evening, Agile acquisition enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Underground Digital Tiki Bar. It's Friday night, and that means it's time for another episode of Agile Acquisitions and Alcohol. Cheers. Welcome back. On tonight's episode, we're going to talk about 8 questions that a contracting officer should ask themselves and their customer before going out with an acquisition. This video is critically important to contracting officers to make sure they thoroughly understand what it is that they're actually buying, and equally important to industry to get inside the heads of acquisition folks as they're pulling acquisitions together, so that when you are preparing or pursuing an acquisition, you can better posture yourself in the marketplace. So let's get started. Number 1, is the requirement that my customer is asking for available in the commercial marketplace? If so, a commercial acquisition as provided under FAR Part 12, and which can be combined with FAR 13.5, simplified acquisition procedures for commercial acquisitions, can significantly streamline the acquisition process. Plus, it has more favorable terms and conditions for both parties. So taking advantage of these authorities and these processes can be very helpful in getting to the solution faster. Number 2, what are the essential functions or characteristics that the product or the service will be providing? You have to really understand what it is you're buying. Back in my early days of contracting, I used to buy or really early research and development activities. And when I would do that, I would walk down the hall to the really, really smart scientists down there that were thinking of cutting edge technology. And I would just talk to them, because there's one thing I know: nerds like to talk about what they're nerdy about. I made a whole YouTube channel based on it. It's true. Sit down and they will educate you so you actually have a deep understanding of what you're buying and will be better suited to distinguish between different offers and frame the acquisition in the way most appropriate to get the solution that they need. Number 3, is the customer describing a brand or a branded solution? And if so, is that something that you can acquire from multiple different vendors? There's something to distinguish between only one responsible source and a brand name sole source justification. Under only one responsible source, you're saying there's only one vendor out there who can fill this need at this time in the way that I need it. When you're saying there's a brand name justification, you're saying there's one capability, potentially one product out there that can meet my needs. But potentially there are resellers or many resellers that can actually fulfill or provide that product or capability to the government. Number 4, are any of the requirements described inherently governmental? That's a key phrase in government acquisitions. And basically it means what it sounds like. The government is not allowed to acquire services or products, primarily services, which are considered inherently governmental. A great example of that is you can't hire someone with contracting signature authority. So the signing of the contract is inherently governmental. You absolutely can hire contract support to the government contracting process, but the actual authority to authorize or commit the government to spending money is inherently governmental. Number 5, will any of the roles required, primarily for a labor contract, require access to sensitive information? Sensitive information can range from private personal information, PII, all the way to classified and highly classified information. It's important to remember, if that's a requirement of the contract, that you may be limiting the scope of available vendors that can meet your need. And if you do offer an award or select a vendor that doesn't have the right certifications to provide that capability, you need, and the customer needs, to understand that there will be a period of time between contract award and when the vendor will actually be able to do the work associated with that sensitive information. Number 6, does the customer require or envision the contractor to work on site? Now, of course, during COVID, a lot of the government has gotten very comfortable with virtual support. That being said, there are a lot of government requirements that will need to have the contractors on site. If a contractor is going to be on site, there's lots of things to consider. The rates may be different. The government will have to have space and provide space for them. And there will be an additional security level associated, maybe as simple as just an ID card to access the facility, all the way up to, again, if they're going to be working on a floor where classified information, for example, is processed, that they will have to be read on to the level of that classification. Number 7, how will the product functionality or service functionality outcomes be described? How are you going to tell industry how you're going to measure success? This is critically important as well, so that you have a thorough understanding and industry has a crystal clear understanding of how they're going to be measured against the requirements in the requirement document. And that's true whether it's a statement of objective, PWS, or performance work statement, or a statement of work. You need to be explicit about how you will determine success from a program success perspective, but also from as simple as an invoice acceptance level. What do you need to see? What constitutes a successful outcome of that endeavor? And finally, number 8, what elements of the product or service could drive cost or produce value? When you think about driving costs, something that we talk about in the acquisition world is the life cycle of cost. So it's not just the cost of procuring a product or service, it's what does it cost after you've procured it. If you're doing traditional waterfall development, you may have a production stage and an operation and maintenance stage or sustainment stage. And if it's proprietary code, you could potentially be paying for sustainment indefinitely. Under more modern software solutions, you may continue to pay for iterative development or to receive updated product pushes or capabilities. These are all costs that have to be considered. If data centers or cloud capabilities are going to be provided by the government, those are additional costs potentially beyond the scope of the actual contract itself. So all of these factors have to be considered. Additionally, space. If you have to provide space for the vendor, as mentioned before, there are additional costs associated with that. On the other side of that coin, you have how are you going to produce value with this capability? In order for a program to thrive and continue to get funded and then potentially increased budget levels, you have to be able to show value for what the government is spending. Having a clear understanding up front will better position the program manager to define what that value is and show that value in real life as it's delivered. It's also very helpful to industry to understand what do you consider producing value from this capability, because that way they can optimize it. You got to remember that there's always going to be trade-offs anytime you buy something. That's true in your everyday life. If you buy a car and you want to buy a certain feature, you may lose another feature, or you may have to pay more to have both. And these are the sort of trade-offs that have to be made in government procurements as well. So there you have it. There are 8 questions that a contracting officer should be asking of themselves and a customer, and that industry should be aware of so that they can position themselves for success, both in the acquisition phase and in the delivery phase. I hope you found this informative. If you did, remember to subscribe, give me a like. Feel free to sign on as a patron if you want to contribute to this channel and help to improve the content and quality. And until next week, cheers.